Hey everyone, I'm Fran Gallagher, and this is my crew of people who are interested in discussing spiritual subjects to make spirituality more accessible to everyone. And tonight we want to talk about the phenomenon of direct experience. So when you have direct experience, no one needs to convince you of anything. The question is, are you open-minded enough to have the direct experience? And then what direct experience are you going to make yourself available for? So this group of people, we've all done one form or another of direct experience. Carol, I know, actually it says George on your, um, I don't know if you know how, but if you go into gallery mode and you move your cursor, there will be 3 dots at the right front. Can we just, oh, we can rename you. We are renaming you.
Well, that
Very
would be
good.
wonderful. Yes, I see the rename. Um,
Okay, we
yes.
renamed you. Great, good job. So, for me, direct experience has always been a thing. When I was a child, I saw non-physical beings. I didn't need to work very hard to see them. They were all over. And in fact, I think I have lost some of the ability that I had as a child, but I have experienced directly spirituality in all kinds of ways, including working with spiritual teachers, meditation, having visions, whatever it might be. Carol, I would like to focus on you for a moment because I see you're in the view with yourself and a horse in a painting. And let's talk about the direct experience that you've had with horses. And Bunky, we can then talk about your direct experience with horses. So Carol, what say you?
Well, being with horses to me is a continuum of direct experience, right? And it's funny that you brought this up because one of the non-direct experiences I've had which is has to do with confusion in our culture with direct experience, is having information and confusing that with experience. Sometimes we want things so badly that we think if we hear about them or read about them, that we've had that experience, but when in fact that is not true. The other thing about direct experience, which is not related just to horses, is that it is wonderful to be open-minded. At the same time, it's really good to have discretion. I've learned through my experiences, especially ones that are more esoteric or not entirely third dimensional, that I never expect anyone to believe my experiences if they're not open-minded. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way. If you haven't had an experience, I think it's can be very difficult to relate to the experience. And I think it's always a good idea not to force that down somebody's throat. You can read their body language. If they become disinterested, change the subject. If their body language says stop, it's best just to let it go.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think that when we have direct experience that builds out a dimension of our regular lives, and what I mean is when you have what can only be called telepathic communication with another species. You know, the 3 species that we're most likely to have telepathic communication with, most of us, would be dogs, cats, and horses. And being able to read the body language of a dog, a cat, or horse, being able to understand when they might be communicating something to us. I love the stories. One woman talked about a cat that came in and woke her up and wouldn't stop meowing. And she couldn't figure out what the problem was that the cat was upset about. And so she went walking around her house or apartment, and she discovered the electrical panel on fire. That's what the cat was trying to tell her, that the electrical panel was on fire. So we can experience interspecies communication. And there are those who may not be able to experience it. And there are those of us who are tuned into it. What did you want to say?
And
I just wanted to expand this into the domain of empathy. Because if I am paying attention, if I'm receiving and listening and engaging in our conversation, then I'm experiencing what you are experiencing, and that gives me direct experience.
And where I was leading was, Bunky, would you like to talk about your experience with your horse in that category of direct experience?
This is not an experience that I myself had, but my sister was riding alone, and all of a sudden her horse, who was quite obedient most of the time, would not move forward. And the harder she tried, the more he resisted moving forward. And another rider came by and he said, "I'm so glad that you didn't go through there, because we grew up in St. Louis, and there was a huge, I don't know what you'd call it, but a huge number of copperheads in the trail, on the trail. And the horse knew much better than to go forward. And I have always just loved that story.
I want to piggyback on that and talk about briefly. We had a cat who was the boss of the neighborhood, and one of the neighbors told my children that he was going to kill our cat. And my kids came home crying. And the problem was that our cat was beaten up by all the other neighbor cats initially, but then he grew up and he was, I hope it's okay if I use bad language, because he was a badass. And no name would stick to him. He was the cat. And one night, what would happen was my dog Basil and I would break up cat fights and bring the cat home so that he wasn't furthering this problem with beating up on other cats. So one night, Basil and I got up in the middle of the night and we went to the front door, and Basil ran into the front door because I didn't open the door fast enough. So another night we hear meow, and we head to the front door and Basil didn't move. And normally he would have just streaked out there because his job was to break up the cat fight. And he didn't move. So I nudged him with my knee and he still wouldn't move. And I'm looking out because I'm half asleep. He's half asleep. And there was a light post about 20 feet from the front door. And that's where the cats were fighting around the light post. And in the next moment, lightning struck that light post. And we would have been out there in striking distance of the lightning. But instead, I saw everything light up with blue and all the cats went, and our cat came home and there was no need. And Basil felt that. So I love your story. And when you experience this directly, or you hear it from a credible other source, it's very moving.
Can I add to this, Fran,
Please
about,
do.
and great story, Bunky. Wow, both your stories. Um, all of us have the ability to communicate with animals. All of us have the ability to be intuitive. We just have to remember what we've forgotten often, and an important piece is practice. And one thing that I've developed with my animals and horses, and I'm sure most other people have that like to communicate with them, is it takes time to build relationships, right? And after a while, you can read the body language and also how animals can send us pictures.
They do.
Yes, interpret them differently, different ways of sensing. You might feel chills, you might feel a constriction or expansion in your heart. Again, you may see pictures. We have a cat that is somewhat new to us. We've had him, he's been with us for a year, and he was a feral cat. And he still won't let George touch him unless food is involved, but he's come a long ways. And when I met him, he wouldn't let me near him. He was hiding under a couch. And I asked if he wanted to come home with me. And I got a huh. And then I said, well, what's your name? And as far as I know, no one had ever given him a name. And I heard loudly and clearly, not like a voice in my head, but I heard Rango, and that's his name. And every time I say Rango, he goes meow. So yeah, I think that this is just part of having direct experience, is putting the time and effort and being quiet and receiving enough to have those direct experiences.
There was a dog that I took care of last year because I do dog sitting on the side. And he told me that he was a big, big, beautiful collie, very large for a collie. And he told me that he preferred to be called Lance, and that's not what they had named him. But I'm in my mind, I call him Lance. I haven't seen him since I took care of him. But it bothers me when animals tell me something like I'd rather be called Lance, but I can't really tell their owners that because the owner named him something else. And it's just these animals are sort of stuck with us dumb humans, they're trying to explain things to us. And we don't always get it.
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it? That is, to me, it's tricky to communicate with animals, because when an animal tells you, like for instance with horses, you may hear that my saddle doesn't fit, it hurts my back. And then if you tell that horse's person and they say something like, oh, well, I've had the saddle since I was 15 years old and I love the saddle. Wow,
They don't meet. The two ends of the conversation don't meet.
I I would kind of like to expand the conversation into how direct experience can be a limitation to taking in someone else's experience.
Well, that's interesting. If you insist that you get nothing from animals, no communication, and that we're all just ridiculous, then you're going to be closed to what seems so obvious to me or to some of the rest of you. Um, I've been in so many situations where someone might say, well, why are we doing that? And it's kind of like, well, why wouldn't we do that? Every sign that I've got points in that direction. I'm trying to think of, I can't think of an example right now, but if you've ever told a joke that certain people get and certain people do not get, that's just the way it is. Sometimes I'm going to understand communication from any of you on this call, and sometimes I'm just not going to get it. And owning up to that and trying to make it be, as there's a slang term, keeping it real. but just owning up when I don't know what you're talking about, or I do know what you're talking about, whatever it might be.
I think these are good examples. It goes right into when I judge someone from my experience, I'm missing out on a large part of what I can learn from interacting with them.
And that circles back around to being open-minded, right? And yeah, the,
I remember one time I led a guided visualization, and there was a physician in the group. And everybody shared after the guided visualization. And we got to him, and he said, I was completely aware of my entire vasculature.
mm,
So he was feeling his heart beating and his blood moving in his body. And he was completely dumbstruck by that experience. He wasn't anticipating that. And I love that about guided visualization because it can lead people to their own authentic, direct experience. It doesn't have to be the same as my experience. And in fact, when I lead guided visualization, um, miracles can happen. I remember um, one time I led a guided visualization for a group who often hired me to lead them in meditations. And there were 5 people in the group, if I remember correctly. And they had made up an appointment with me. And they came at the time I had an office, and they came to my office. And at the last minute, they included one other person who was a beginner. But I had broken my own rule. I try not to get downloads before I work with a client or before I work with a group, because even a last minute change might alter what is best for that group. Well, I had downloaded in my mind, I'd received from my guides, that's what I call it, downloading, an advanced guided visualization. And they brought this beginner, and I didn't adjust for the beginner. So the whole time I'm leading this advanced guided visualization that was appropriate for the others, I'm just beating up on myself. You should have done what's called the secret place meditation, because that would have been appropriate for this beginner. And so I'm beating up on myself the whole time I'm leading this meditation. And at the end, everyone shared except the new person. The new person went last. And the secret place meditation is where I lead someone, they're walking along a path in a forest. They come to an opening in the forest, a meadow, or some sort of protected secret place. And they go into this little meadow, and they might sit down on a log, and they might have a guide or an angel or a wise being or a past loving relative show up in this clearing, and they might have an experience with that person. And that was what I had wished I had done with this beginner present. So everybody's talking about angels and the lights above Denver, because I was in Denver, and all this stuff. And we get to the last person, and I'm just cringing because I'm expecting him to say, I didn't know what was going on. And he said, you guys are talking about angels and lights over the city of Denver. I don't know what you're talking about, because I found myself walking along a path in a forest. I came to a clearing, and I met with a guide. So he had the experience he needed to have. Everybody else had the experience they needed to have. And I have found that to be true over and over. Go ahead.
I just want to circle around to what Carol was saying earlier about communication with animals, that often we send that information in pictures. You sent it in, oh my goodness, I should have included this. They received the message, and that was part of their experience. So well done.
Oh,
Yeah.
So
Thank
So
you.
can I say this? You cannot entirely direct an experience, right?
Oh, right, because it's about the guides and the angels and the other person participating. I mean, haven't we all had a client or a friend we're trying to explain something to, and they simply are not getting it and they're not going to get it. They're not open to it. In the last years of my dad's life, I had these extraordinary conversations with him, and I won't go into that right now, but one of my brothers, and I'm one of 7, one of my brothers was like, he heard what I was experiencing with my dad. So he went and he sat with my dad, and he said later, I sat with him for 15 minutes and he never said any of those things that he says to you. He never said any of that to me. And my mouth was hanging open because I spent days with him before we were entrained enough that he was comfortable talking to me about, because he had dementia, but he had an active experience going for himself. And he would relate that to me, but he didn't relate it to me like on time, like we got 15 minutes, dude. So it's very tricky. How do we entrain with our clients, if you're a coach or a therapist or a healer or a teacher or an organizer? Because what you want to do is entrain with the person or the animal. And sometimes it's immediate. And entrain
Mhm.
just means that your brain waves are more or less in sync with the other person's.
Hmm.
I'm thinking of an elderly woman I once took care of. She had Parkinson's, and her husband was angry, angry, angry because she refused, in his mind, she was refusing to go to a therapeutic pool that was a warm water therapeutic pool at the local recreation center. And so they considered me a whisperer. I can be a dog. People think I'm a dog whisperer or a child whisperer or whatever kind of whisperer. But all it is that I just tune into the person. And I asked her, because she was very silent. She barely spoke. And I quietly asked her, do you not want to go to the pool because you don't have a bathing suit? And she said, yes. So I took her to a special swimsuit shop for, that all year has swimming suits, and they cater to people. They can accommodate someone in a wheelchair and things like that, which she had to be in a wheelchair to go there. They fitted her with a swimsuit, and then she was willing to go to the rec center. And everyone was like, oh, Fran did this and Fran did that. All Fran did was ask the right question.
Hmm.
Mhm.
That goes into how do we set this up? How do we set up a space between us that we can have a direct experience and engage in a way that we can discover something new about each other? I think that permission is a great tool. Um,
Mhm.
you have, well, when someone gives me permission, it's almost like settling into the experience itself. Let me go further into it and share it. Um, Along with permission, I think that appreciation and curiosity are both good tools
Mhm.
to facilitate that.
Um, and I
And
would,
necessary for open-mindedness, of course, right?
Mhm.
but
Going back to
appreciation,
where we started.
appreciation, acknowledgement, validation, we can
Ooh.
all use those tools to experience and develop rapport.
Hmm.
And that rapport is the open door for some of us to have direct experience.
Hmm. So it sounds to me as though we are promoting relationships.
Okay. Relationships between people and animals, relationships between people and people. Funky, do you have anything to add?
If I take a detour, and maybe if I tell you what's in my mind, you will be able to help me tie it in to what we're talking about.
Okay.
I mentioned that I'm from St. Louis, and Missouri is the show me state. And I have always been skeptical about just about everything that comes my way. And I had an experience, it's as clear to me today as it was when it happened. But a voice came into my head and it gave me instructions, and I had no idea where it came from. I had absolutely no intention of doing as I was told. And it turns out that it would have been a very good thing for me to have understood that I did have the gift of intuition and that I was receiving a message as clearly as if Fran or Carol or Sean were speaking to me and offering me advice. And I think that so often when we express direct experience, the people around us are often skeptical.
Mhm.
And I think that I'm not sure quite how to tie it into what we've talked about, but with my not knowing where that voice came from, I didn't trust it at all. And as I've grown older, I've learned so much that I listen, and I get messages frequently, and I see pictures in front of me that I don't ever remember my dreams when I sleep. But the best thing I can tell you is what I do get that are like dreams, I would call daydreams.
Uh-huh.
And
Mhm.
it's not daydreaming and, believing I'm on the beach in Mexico and drinking a margarita. It's not that sort of thing. It's a very solid message that I'm thinking of receiving. And there's a part of me that says, if only you would pay more attention.
Well, let me ask you, have you acted on those messages?
In some cases, yes. And in some cases, fear prevents it. Fear is a big one.
So,
Hesitation. Go ahead.
well, I'm just thinking of a key and a lock. They're useless without one another. So receiving the insight and then taking action is necessary. You won't be able to realize the benefit of the message until you've acted upon it. So I would ask you and others who have a similar issue, what do you need to be able to act upon it the next time you hear a voice in your head, or you receive pictures, or you see something, feel something, sense something? Recently I had a client I was leading them in a guided visualization where they burned an agreement. They set fire to an agreement in their mind. And I was surrounded by the smell of burning, even
Yeah.
though I wasn't there. It wasn't real. But could you give up first the evidence-based, pardon me, crap? Evidence-based stuff is great until you get to these direct internal experiences. So you won't get the evidence until you act upon it. So what do you need in order to feel comfortable acting upon the message?
Excuse me, I have to sign off. It's been really fun.
All
Okay,
right.
thank you,
Thanks,
Kara.
Talk to you
Carol.
soon. Take care.
I would like to answer that. going back to the word permission, one of the things that I have noticed about my own experience is that I have times when I have second guessed myself and found that that second guessing was actually accurate. There are times when triggers of self-protection can also be added as self-discovery. It's looking at it from a different perspective. So if I'm looking at it from a place of self-protection, it's going to be reserved and brought in and guarded, whereas self-expression is going to be searching for that direct experience.
So what do you need to trust the messages, Bunky?
I am not in a place right now to answer that, but I am in a place where I'm more than willing to ponder.
Oh, good. Okay, good. So for me, normalizing to receiving the messages would be the first step. To not demonize the messages, to not ascribe some sort of malintent to the
I've never
messages.
done that.
Good, but
They
that's
are what I'm thinking about are messages that have a very high potential for success if followed.
okay. And so then we have to have the courage of our conviction. And we could even ask for confirmation. You know, if you receive a message and you're not sure if you want, you know, about 2 weeks ago, it was a Friday and I had, financially, I had a little more money than I expected to have by Friday. And before I could think of what I wanted to do with it, because I was kind of excited that it was just a little more, just in case anyone cares, I got the message to give it to a particular person. And all day I got the message to give it to that person. So by the end of the day, I was like, oh, all right. And I gave it to that person. Well, they had just gotten out of the hospital and they had no income and they were in bad shape. And my gift made a difference. So sometimes what I do is wait to hear it a second time. Now, I have had experiences of guidance where there's not going to be a second time, honey. You've got to go get out now means get out now. So sometimes we have to act upon it immediately. And sometimes we have the luxury of waiting to either, as I said, receive it again or experience some kind of confirmation.
Now, I would like to add that when we look at things in hindsight, oftentimes we can measure their success. So whether something works out or it doesn't work out, I can use hindsight as a measurement for that.
And I call that a feedback loop. If you get a message and you act upon it, then pay attention to what happens. If you get a message and you don't act upon it, pay attention to what happens. And you are informing yourself about the safety of acting on that. We're going to be wrapping up here, but I use the example of I purchased stock one time. I'm not some sort of investment person, but I purchased some stock, and one day I heard in my head that I should sell it that day. Well, I didn't have time. I didn't get around to it. The next day I wake up and I get the same message that I need to sell the stock. So I sold the stock the second day. If I had sold it the first day, it would have sold at 4 times the price I sold it for. I bought it for, rather. Because I waited a day, I sold it for 3 times what I had purchased it for. So maybe one of these days I'll be able to get into some kind of investment stuff. But in the meantime, I sure wish I'd sold it the first time I was told.
And you know, going back to the direct experience, trusting yourself and what you experience is a really important part of that process. And the greater the trust, the more your faith can take you to new places.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I just want to add that if you get a message to do something immoral, unethical, or illegal, then your messages are coming from the wrong place. And come to me, I'll do an energy clearing. We'll get you sorted out so that you can be connected to actual guides who are helping with our evolutionary process. Because there are those voices that may come from a place of malevolence instead of benevolence. And that is possible, but I don't concern myself too much about that because I believe I have aligned with goodness in my life. So it's a question of, would you like to align with beneficence or malfeasance? Which one do you want to align with? Any other thoughts before we close?
I just want to encourage everyone that's watching. How do we create exchanges between us that lift up direct experience and encourage it in each other?
Ooh. So hanging out with people who are calibrated, shall we say, to direct experience can be a big help. All right. Well, thank you for those of you who are watching this as a recording. Thank you so much for spending time with us. And thank you, Bunky and Sean. We sort of have a unconventional arrangement this evening, and that happens sometimes. So take good care and thank you to everyone.